So maybe you can talk a little bit about, because I know that you're involved in at least one of these instances, the challenge of the constitutionality of no fault divorce. We have a case in Nebraska going on. I know that you've been more familiar and intimate with the one going on in Pennsylvania. Another legislator that I've talked to recently up in South Dakota is looking to pass uh, uh, legislation to abolish no fault divorce. We've done it for 3 terms here. Matthew Cross is planning to introduce it again. So I mean, there is a resistance to this unilateral no fault divorce. But tell us a little bit more about what you know about regarding the case, either in Nebraska or in Pennsylvania or both.
Yeah, so there is definitely a resistance, and it has happened throughout a long period of time. But there are different ways to chip away at this system. There's the legislature, like you said. There's either abolishing no fault entirely or altering it at least to a mutual condition whereby both spouses have to agree, rather than just having it unilateral, because that is the most devastating, is to have it unilateral.
Right.
If you don't want grounds, you don't want, it's not ideal, but at the same time, it's much better than having one spouse decide for the whole family. And so
Right.
there's the legislative route, as you said, which is repeatedly blocked by the family law section and those that are typically in the committees. But again, the effort is being made, and maybe there will be success in the future. Then there's also the courts, which again, it's a different approach. It's the approach where you say that it's actually the law, the statute is actually unconstitutional. It was unconstitutional from its passage. It's unconstitutional in all of its applications.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially both cases being made. I'm a little bit less familiar with the one in Nebraska, but it's, I think, based on a similar premise of basically, taking this guy's house and, forcing him out of the house, forcing him away. Fortunately, his kids are emancipated, but, basically taking all of his hard-earned wealth throughout his life and redistributing it to the wife. And
Right.
Why? If he broke the law again, and this is the thing, people like to say, well, we don't want to play the blame game. Well, it's not about blame, it's about protection. And if you
Right.
get rid of these protections, what's going to happen is that the state's going to tell you what to do, and you're going to comply. Otherwise, you're going to go to jail. And, all of this hard-earned wealth in the state that you've built up throughout your whole life, you're not compensating anyone.
Right.
It's called forfeiture. It's something that you go into the negative. It's not like you're at a zero balance. You go into the negative because you've never done anything wrong. You haven't violated the law, and yet the state is taking from you. And so that's a forfeiture.
Right.
The case in Pennsylvania, I'm more familiar with. It's essentially what we've been talking about all this time, that the husband has made a constitutional argument based on the First Amendment and also the Special Laws Clause, but particularly the Establishment Clause, saying essentially that the no-fault statute is favoring his wife based on the law being a viewpoint-based statute. And there's a lot of cases recently that have to do with viewpoint-based statutes, which is very interesting, because we're going into this era now where, again, laws are being made based on someone's opinion about something. And what's very fascinating about Pennsylvania is that they already had a no-fault divorce case that had to do with this issue. And basically what the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania had said is that it cannot favor, in that case, the husband was the defendant. The husband didn't want the divorce, and the wife wanted the divorce. And in that case, Pennsylvania said that we can't favor your opinions. We have to go by what the law says. We can't favor your opinions and endorse your opinions over the opinions of your wife. That's interesting, because the same principle should apply here. The state should not be endorsing the opinions of the person that wants out. If you're not going to endorse the opinions of the defendant, you shouldn't endorse the opinions of the plaintiff either.
Yes. Yeah. That's a very good point.
That's the conundrum that they've put themselves in, because they said, well, what do you want us to do? Well, we want you to declare the statute unconstitutional, because the solution is not to endorse either viewpoint. The solution is to throw out the law completely, because it's based on viewpoint. And so anyway, that's the argument that he's making there. And we'll see how that turns out. The coronavirus has delayed the case a little bit. And then I think something that you wanted me to mention too, as a single young person, who's not married yet, is there a way for me to proactively sue the state and say, I can't enter into a marriage without any legal protections, because no fault has basically nullified marriage as a civil institution. And so even before I enter into a marriage, the state that I live in doesn't even provide any protections from the moment that I get married, if I get married. And so, is there a way to sue the state on that basis? That would be very interesting. I don't know, but it's something to explore because, why should, and I'm not an incel. I'm not part of that kind of, movement, but I'm very sympathetic to it because the more and more young men understand what they're getting themselves into, it's not just your wife that you have to deal with, it's the state government. And that's a much different player and a much more powerful one too. And so, they say, love is a risk and stuff. Yeah, well, you're not dealing just with your spouse anymore. You're dealing with the government, and that's a little bit more scary, and it's more risky, and it's something that people should take into account because even those who wish to do prenuptial agreements, if the judge doesn't like you, or you're again a traditionalist, they'll find a way to nullify the prenuptial agreement. They've done it several times. They've said, so and so was did not give their consent, or whatever. They'll come up with ways to even undermine prenuptial agreements. So
So it's again the things that you're talking about here. Marriage can be the greatest blessing, but it can also be the greatest liability. Marriage can be that institution which, when your spouse wants out of it for whatever reason, based on his or her viewpoint, it can end up destroying your life. And I say this because using a recent example right now, today I found out about a 34-year-old man. He was an orthopedic surgeon. He was probably making about $30,000 a month. Just finished medical school, got his practice built up and everything, and his wife left him unilaterally. And he was trying to say, he didn't want this to happen. Was trying to, think if I do anything very difficult, very harsh, maybe she won't come back. But the divorce was supposed to be either today or yesterday or something like that. And he went out and he shot himself. Because at this point, the judge was giving her $25,000 out of the $30,000. I believe that was some of the details. He was not able to see his kids. He was being gaslighted. He was being abused. And that which should have been the greatest blessing in his life became that which destroyed him inwardly. And these judges, I don't care what people say, these judges and some of these legislators and some of these family law attorneys have blood on their hands. Just because somebody else did the crime or somebody else killed themselves does not mean that they are not at fault. I am very adamant about this, that they have blood on their hands, innocent blood in many instances.